Okay, thank you, everybody. It's great to have you for this session. We will be discussing peer review during COVID-19, and I'd like to introduce our next presenters. All are graduates of the Masters of Professional Studies in Publishing program at GW. Cheryl Johnson is publishing editor for the journals department at the American Psychological Association, where she serves as project manager for departmental initiatives and oversees a portfolio of APA journals. Previously, Cheryl has worked as peer review coordinator at APA for nearly 3 years and has experience working in production at the Water Environmental Federation and digital marketing at the National Sleep Foundation. Cheryl holds an MPS in publishing from GW. Lois Jones is peer review manager for the journals department at American Psychological Association, where she co-manages the peer review program, which includes 90 journals and 23 peer review coordinators. Lois is focused on ensuring a transparent and ethical peer review process for authors while providing reviewers and editors with exceptional support in the constantly changing landscape of scholarly publishing. She also holds an MPS in publishing from GW. Jenna Miley is currently a peer review coordinator with the journals department at American Psychological Association, where she works with the flagship journal, American Psychologist. Previously, Jenna interned in foreign rights at 2Cs agencies and Groupe de la Martinière in France, and at APA's children's book imprint, Imagination Press. She holds her MPS in publishing from GW and volunteers as a mentor in the secretary of the board of directors for Space Her Own, Inc. Welcome, Cheryl, Jenna, and Lois, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking about ethics and peer review during the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of what we had originally planned for the April presentation had to be updated in light of the shifting priorities for the year. So first, just kind of briefly to talk about who we are and our topics. So like John said, my name is Lois Jones, and I'm one of the peer review managers at the American Psychological Association. So I manage the peer review experts, and then I work on department-wide projects that impact our journals. Some of my kind of very specific interests include reviewer initiatives and process improvements. Jenna, did you want to say anything else about yourself?
Sure. I'm Jenna Miley, and I'm one of the peer review coordinators at APA. So as a coordinator, I manage the process from initial manuscript submission through peer review up until transmittal to production. As a department, we also get to do process improvement and other projects to improve the department. And one of my main areas of interest is engaging with early career psychologists.
And Cheryl, anything else from you?
Sure. So as John mentioned earlier, I am the publishing editor, and I manage a small portfolio of journals as it relates to increasing manuscript submissions, citations, and content usage. As my role relates to today's presentation, I advise editors on ethical concerns as they arise and ensure that they comply with APA's publication policies and journal standards.
Great, thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about what we've been doing to support ethics and diversity, how we're adapting to the circumstances and needs of this year, and then what we're doing moving forward. Sorry, let me just move this slide forward. Okay, so for some context on the APA, so we are a membership association and a publisher. We publish around 90 journals. We also publish books and videos. The book we're most well known for is the publication manual, which is used in many schools and across various disciplines. We actually recently just came out with a new edition, and it includes the Journal Article Reporting Standards, also known as JARS, which are guidelines to help enhance scientific rigor in articles. And it also has a section on bias-free language, which we're very proud of. Our journal content areas cover a wide range of psychology, including social psychology, school psychology, personality disorders, animal behavior, and many, many others. As an association publisher, we do publish our own journals, which means they are part of our association governance structure. So they are guided by and also held to APA's policies and procedures. We also publish on behalf of other divisions, societies, and associations. And so that's useful because then we get to see multiple points of view for a lot of the issues that are out there. One of the things that is consistent across all of our journals is our devotion to both ethics and ED&I efforts. So before I go any further, I will recognize that there are a lot of things to talk about when you talk about ethics and ED&I, and they're very broad topics. But specifically when we're talking about diversity, we're not only talking about racial diversity, although this is very integral in that discussion. So our focus on ethics and diversity are part of pretty much all of our conversations. When we're introducing new features or processes, we do evaluate if we're helping people, if we're removing barriers, or if we're strengthening the ethical backbone of our department. One of our core driving forces in peer review is the focus on the people who are involved. So authors, reviewers, and editors, they're spending so much of their time and effort developing and creating the science, which then becomes our content. So we do view it as very high priority to make sure that the process is working for them. And on this slide, you'll also see just a few of the things that we have been working on prior to this year, but also through this year, to help support those efforts. So one of the things that we're very proud of is our APA publishing ED&I framework. And so this is a bit of a mouthful, so stick with me, but our mission statement is to enable a program that is equitable, diverse, and inclusive as reflected in its content, composition, goals, policies, standards, operations, practices, culture, and climate. The framework includes 4 sections, and that's equitable content, inclusive science, a diverse community, and an inclusive publishing industry. So all 4 of those are necessary, and they are ongoing efforts. This isn't something that gets solved overnight. Within the inclusive science part is our focus on equity through open science. So we want our open science practices to make the field of psychology more diverse, inclusive, and equitable. Quick examples of what we're doing include implementing the credit taxonomy for journals to recognize authorship contributions. We're encouraging pre-registrations, and we are asking that authors provide more detailed reporting on the participant demographics for a study. To paraphrase part of the ED&I framework, the goal is to address inequalities through transparency and openness, then to advance inclusive and equitable standards for research and publication. So this is a big thing. There are lots of smaller projects kind of built into that for next year. Definitely kind of an ongoing approach. But then kind of nice flip side is the next thing on the list is just a small but very important change that we made this year for equity purposes. So beginning earlier this year, authors are now able to have their names updated in the published version of their article if they have changed it post-publication. Although people do change their names for different reasons, this was specifically brought forth by one of our divisions because transgender authors encounter a lot of gatekeeping. And this was small but important in order to provide equity and just remove a barrier for them. There's a few other publishers I've seen announce this recently, so I think it's like a thing in the zeitgeist that's really catching on, and I think that's great. Another thing we've done this year, we have multiple special issues related to COVID-19 and also race-related special issues. Some of these include commentaries on the experiences and also empirical research on, everybody shifting to virtual work or school, therapy, conferences like this, but also the impact on depression, trauma. These are going to be long-term issues, and the impact of the pandemic will be long-lasting. So the research can help practitioners and others really help people out there. Also, the race-related special issues include improving access to care for diverse populations, dismantling anti-Blackness and eradicating systemic racism, and uncovering mental health disparities. So huge topics that we're really proud to help researchers and practitioners really move forward. So all of these relate to peer review in that everything, within publishing somehow kind of connects back to it. But now I'd like to start talking about our specific peer review experience in 2020. So this is not the year anyone expected by any means, and it has required a lot of flexibility. We actually had a brief concern in March that we would see a drop in submissions. And we were a little worried about that, but actually across the board, we have seen about a 30% increase. And I've heard that from a lot of other publishers, and it's really great. But due to this increase in submissions, our reviewers have been taxed more than ever before. So they are currently people out there navigating the pandemic, navigating uncertain economic times, and they're still reviewing for us. So there's definitely this need for empathy and a focus on customer service to make sure that we are alleviating the stress where we can and we're not burdening them more than we have to. Within that mindset, we still implemented rapid review for several journals to make sure that the time-sensitive content that really needs to be out there was getting through the peer review process, but while upholding our focus on ethics so that authors are still receiving appropriate peer review. So these articles are going to be out there for a long time. The standards aren't dropping. We just have to make sure we're moving faster. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jenna so she can talk about how she introduced rapid review to our flagship title, American Psychologist.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about why we decided to pursue rapid review for the flagship journal, how I implemented the process in the editorial manager system, and then a couple key takeaways from the experience. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, our editorial team decided to open a call for papers related to COVID-19. We knew we wanted the research to get out in a timely manner so that it was relevant as things were progressing, but we also wanted to uphold our normal peer review standards. So we decided the best option would be to implement rapid review with an expedited production process for articles related to COVID-19. So to set up the rapid review process, I needed to think through the settings in Editorial Manager and how to best handle these new submissions. Meanwhile, the editor contacted her board of reviewers to see if they would be willing to review COVID-19 manuscripts within a 2 to 3 day turnaround time. So this was a really big commitment for people who are already overtaxed. So we got a selection of rapid reviewers. I think there were about 50. We set up reviewer invitations in the system outlining specific instructions for the COVID-19 articles, as well as outlining the short turnaround time, just to make sure these articles were reviewed at the same standard as our normal process, but in a quicker turnaround time. So I put flags on each person in the system so that editors and the associate editors would find them more easily. And I had to personally be more responsive to reviewers who were requesting extensions so that everything ran smoothly, or as smooth as possible. Authors were also expected to return their revisions around within a week. So our normal peer review process is about 3 weeks for review and then 30 to 60 days for revision. So this was quite the cut in time. Once articles were accepted, we expedited them through production to online first publication, and they were set to be open access. We decided to publish the articles as a rolling special section in the print issues, so the backlog of papers that were previously accepted weren't delayed too long, because we recognize the importance of getting previously accepted content out in print as reasonable as possible, and that COVID-19 doesn't really have a foreseeable end date. In response to the open call, which we put up in about April or May, we had a huge uptick in papers and had to pivot our process. Year to date, we have had 450 COVID submissions, in addition to the regular uptick in submissions and then multiple special issues that the journal normally handles. So to put that in perspective, for a journal, for the flagship journal, we normally handle about 250 submissions in a given year, and we've had 450 COVID manuscripts within about 6 months. So this really overburdened our editorial team, as well as the reviewers and internal staff who are managing the process. So we originally planned for rapid review to run through the end of August, but we needed to stop the process and rethink everything in July. About mid-July, we went back to keeping the call open for COVID-19 related manuscripts, but with a regular review process timeline. Additionally, I needed help from my internal team balancing my own workload since I work on other journals in addition to American Psychologist. So the peer review team used external contractors to help with daily administrative tasks. And we were also very transparent with editors and authors about expected delays. We also edited language in journal decision letters and invitations to display empathy towards reviewers and authors who are struggling with everything going on. And this was met with a lot of appreciation, and reviewers were much more likely to accept invitations when they received understanding language and extensions, no matter how small. So the biggest lesson learned is burnout is real for everyone, for reviewers, editors, authors, and internal staff. Balancing everything happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, in addition to wanting to put out quality research, there's just a lot of extra work going on. And also when implementing a new process, there are a lot of variables that we need to consider and that we need to be flexible on as processes go on. You need to be able to pivot to manage the expectations. And peer review is really a very human process. It relies on reviewers and authors who have lives outside of their articles. So in the end, we weren't able to sustain the process long term, but it was really worth getting quality research published. Out of the 450 submissions, we've published about 25 articles that are online, open access, available for people to read, and since it's the flagship journal, have broad interest. So a few examples of what we've published. Out of the 25, I have about 4. Some titles are Flattening the Emotional Distress Curve. Another is The Trajectory of Loneliness in Response to COVID-19. The COVID-19 Telepsychology Revolution, a national study of pandemic-based changes in U.S. mental health care delivery. And then another one is Applying Relationship Science to Evaluate How the COVID-19 Pandemic May Impact Couples' Relationships. So these were really topics that were relevant and still are relevant to the pandemic. So I would encourage anyone who wants to try rapid review. We thought it was worth it to get this solid science out there. And despite the hiccups, we know how to handle rapid review in the future. So that's it.
Great, thank you. I think I also, in the beginning, I believe I might have skipped over talking about how a lot of our COVID-19 stuff is actually open access through the end of the year. So that's another thing that we've been doing. So I believe all of those articles you mentioned as they're coming out, they are open access, right?
Yes, and I don't think I mentioned, we still have the call for papers open for COVID-19 related articles through the end of the year and potentially going into the next year. They're not rapid review anymore, but we still are seeing articles come in, and they all are open access.
Great, awesome. Okay, so that is fantastic. Cheryl, can you now talk about editorial boards?
Sure, happy to do that. So Before I get started, I would like to clarify that within APA journals, editorial boards are usually comprised of a list of individuals that provide quality reviews, and it's not necessarily a board committee. That might be the case with some other publishers. So the toolkit that I've been working on this year is comprised in 3 parts: an FAQ sheet, a best practices document, and a diversity resource list. The FAQ sheet goes through some of the more common questions that we tend to get from new incoming editors, and these can range from how big should my board be, do I need to keep individuals from the previous board, and where can I find people to invite? And all of these are answered in a way that allows for more diversity and equity through providing more opportunities and suggesting that the criteria for success be a merit-based system. One example of this is using reviewer history within Editorial Manager to invite individuals to join the board if they have consistently provided quality reviews. The second document is a best practices sheet, and I used COPE's Code of Conduct for editors for some guiding principles here. But I think the most important part of this is having editors communicate at the start what their expectations are for the board, so that when editors reassess their boards every year, they can hold people accountable. So in some cases, within APA journals, our board members are referred to as editorial board reviewers. In that case, they might be expected to review a set number of reviews for the year. Sometimes they're referred to as consulting editors, and in that case, their capacity may be more along the lines of evaluating the policy and scope of the journal, coming up with special issue ideas, and potentially promoting the journal as part of their role. But more often we see these individuals being listed as editorial board reviewers. So in some cases, an editor, for example, might expect that a reviewer complete 8 reviews at the end of the year. So in this toolkit, I've included a template letter that an editor can use that states, we asked you to complete 8 reviews, we invited you to 12, and let's say that they only responded and completed 2. We can thank them for their time and ask them or let them know that their term has ended and encourage them to reapply in another year. This is important because it leaves positions open to those that are willing to make the commitment. And when I speak about this, we obviously will be more understanding in this year, and this is kind of more a general expectation. The final document is a list of various psychological minority groups that includes APA divisions and several psychological associations, so that editors can have a starting point in who they can reach out to while trying to find more diverse individuals. So how do editors make their boards more diverse and equitable? A good place to start is by providing more opportunities so that those with the experience and want a seat at the table can have those. So, for example, APA journals recently started offering associate editor positions at various commitment levels. So an editor can offer a associate editor position for a full half or quarter position, meaning that in those half and quarter positions, they are only expected to do half or a quarter of that workload, which allows people to get that experience without the huge time commitment and also leaves more positions open. As Jenna and Lois have already talked a little bit about, I think that APA Journals is really good at recognizing that many of our editors and reviewers are very busy individuals, some with multiple jobs and time commitments and publishing responsibilities. So during the pandemic, we want to be especially understanding and providing people with as much flexibility as it relates to their time. So as editors start to formulate their list of who they would like to include, we are encouraging editors to consider, what does their board look like? Is it mostly male? Is it mostly white? Have they considered including individuals from different countries, ethnicities, universities of various socioeconomic status? And do they have a place for early career psychologists? If the early career psychologists aren't ready for a full position, has the editor considered creating fellowships or junior positions so that they could potentially grow into some of those roles? Within the toolkit, we ask that editors challenge themselves each year as they reevaluate their boards to make it more diverse by a certain % each year. At the end of their term, they can look back and appreciate the progress and opportunities they provided, but also more importantly, it's important that diversity isn't just a one-time thing. It's something that needs to constantly be looked at and evaluated if you really want to have that sustainable change. So right now, tracking diversity can be a bit challenging as editors want access to diversity information, but due to limitations on self-disclosing and privacy concerns, editors may need to track based on some assumptions, such as tracking their country of origin or gender information based on information that they found on university websites. So while some of the information may be incorrect, I believe that trying to gather information with the intent of trying to be more diverse is better than not being aware at all. We want to track diversity appropriately, but we recognize that it's hard to get accurate information if it's not available. So we are working on methods to gather more accurate information through surveys so that we can get a better sense of how diverse the populations are. So I talked a bit about how editors can make their boards more diverse, but why does it matter? If we have a list of people at the top of their field, they're really good reviewers, why do we need diversity? Because we need to include the voice and opinions of others because they come from different perspectives. Within peer review, having diverse reviewers can help identify bias or call attention to a lack of diversity or transparency in sample sizes as it's listed in the research articles that they're reviewing. So we are encouraging of authors to have more COG statements. These are constraints on generalizability, which ask authors to identify and justify target populations for their reported findings. And within editorial boards, diversity matters because not only are they evaluating the content that comes through, this is also a pipeline often into editorships. So individuals that are on the board or associate editors, they can eventually get to those higher positions. And if we want to see more diverse associate editors and editors, we need to start offering those opportunities early on. So with that, I think I'll move on to the next slide. So currently, I know Lois and Jenna talked a bit about how we have a number of calls for papers going on for special issues as it relates to COVID-19. We're really excited to see that there's so much new research coming out as there is still so much to be found out about the long-term effects of the pandemic. On the free resource page for COVID-19, it covers various topics. Some of these include education and distance learning, economic stress and mental health, physical distancing and isolation, stress, anxiety, and grief, as well as work and telework. And we have a call for papers currently as it relates to race and social justice that's within my portfolio, and that one is on police violence. And as you might expect, that call receives some mixed feedback as there are a lot of emotions and opinions behind the issue, and it's become a bit politically charged, but not everything that we do is going to be appreciated by everyone, but this particular call for papers and some of our other ongoing calls related to race and social justice align with APA's goals, as well as those within APA journals. And I think it's really important on the publishing side that we can provide platforms and opportunities for editors and guest editors that want to explore these topics through psychological research. So I will hand things back over to Lois.
Great, thank you. So one of the other things in our next actions is just, we talk a lot about what things look like in peer review or what things look like, but how do we really know? And we have, there's some data and there's some things that are just assumed out there. Sort of like our assumption in March was, okay, we're going to have fewer submissions because people are so busy and stressed out and there's so much going on. Well, that didn't happen. We saw that the data clearly and our experiences clearly show our submissions went up. And so there's a lot of thought about, like, are women submitting fewer manuscripts? Are women not able to review as much? And a lot of times that's sort of by saying because they're assumed to be caretakers in their families. And so we don't know. So one of the things I've been working on is a large scale data report across all of our titles. So we can look at both author and reviewer activities during the pandemic. Have women stopped submitting or reviewing? So having that data won't change anything. Like knowing it is just a starting point. And But if we know, okay, are certain fields impacted more than others within psychology? Are certain people impacted more than others? Once we know if there's an issue and what's going on, we can discuss interventions or ways to remove barriers. And, of course, the final bullet on there is just continued development of resources. Helping authors and reviewers understand the process of peer review helps remove barriers that we don't even really fully know exist. Because as publishing, professionals, we might assume that since papers and reviews are coming in at record-breaking amounts right now, that there aren't barriers. People are clearly figuring out how to do the process. But we're only seeing the people who are getting through, who have figured it out, not the people who are being left behind. And so we really want to make sure that we have things out there that make the process transparent and easy to understand for, early career people or non-traditional authors, non-traditional reviewers, or somebody who dropped out of the process for a while and would like to, come back in and help contribute to the research. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible, and just having resources out there can really help with that. So with that, thank you so much for watching this, for attending, whether it is live or recorded. For the live attendees, we are going to take questions now. If you're watching this as a recorded video later, our email addresses are on the slide. So feel free to email us. We always love getting feedback, hearing what other people are doing, or if you just have suggestions for us, we would appreciate that as well. So let's see what the questions are. Oh, Cheryl, there's one immediately for you. Would you be willing to share the editorial board toolkit with other societies and journals when it's ready?
Yeah, I think once it's finalized with, goes through some higher ups approval, I think that would be fine to share that. We definitely want to encourage more diversity and equity through editorial boards.
Great. And then one, I think that this question's probably for me, is do we survey authors to capture ED&I data? So this is a very long answer, and I will only give you part of it because I'm obsessed with it. But so we do have, the other peer review manager developed a survey. She and one of the associate publishers did send out a survey last year to, I believe it was authors, reviewers, editors, just generally asking everyone who was involved in peer review different questions about, diversity and just their experiences. And we had hoped that our peer review system was adding in a way of actually tracking user submitted data so it would be connected to their peer review activities. Because I think that having the self-report data separately and people saying, oh yeah, this is what I did, is not exactly the same as having it in the system. So we are looking forward to that in 2021. We're supposed to be getting that feature next year. As Cheryl mentioned, there are some privacy considerations. So we do want to be very aware that, we have to have like a statement, some agreement, something that people are definitely aware that we are going to be looking at the data. It's not going to impact their peer review. It's not going to impact their decision. But it does benefit so many people to have the true data connected to everything. Let's see.
We have another great question here from the audience, and audience members, please feel free to send your questions in the Q&A. We still have a few more minutes for this session. So how have APA editors received diversity targets or goals as a measurement of their journal's performance and or individual editor performance? If not all editors have embraced EDI initiatives the same way, how have you strived to get them to see the value?
Cheryl, is that something you feel comfortable speaking to?
To be honest, I don't know if I have enough information on that. Does Lois?
Okay, I can try to answer. So I don't think that we have like kind of an across the board measurement yet on that. It's something that our governance boards, our journals, our divisions have talked about for quite a long time, and there has been a recognized need for increasing diversity. And I feel like it's only within the last year or two that we have really, as a department, started formalizing, what this means and helping and recognizing that it's also on us to be providing more information to them. So we're not quite there yet, but I will say, so all of our new editors, when in any orientations, when they talk about what they're focusing on, I don't think I've heard a new editor for the past like 3 or 4 years not mention, diversity or ED&I explicitly. It is something that they do feel very strongly about, but I don't know if we have specific targets or goals that we're using just yet. Jenna, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I was actually going to jump in and say that at the peer review coordinator level, like, we also really value ED&I diversity and take it upon ourselves to, since we have close relationships with our editors, to, see what they're doing and kind of jump in and suggest changes whenever we, see an opportunity to do so, which is, speaking to Cheryl's section, she recognized from her experiences with the journal, there wasn't changes to the review board, and this editor toolkit kind of came out of that. So we just constantly are talking about it in our coordinator meetings and have periodic updates where we're reading Scholarly Kitchen and just always making sure it permeates on all levels, like down to the coordinator up through governance. We're just constantly talking about it.
We have another question from the audience. How does APA define equitable content?
That is a really good question. It's actually, I still have our ED&I framework open, so I'm going to cheat and I will read exactly what it says, and then I can answer, or we can answer other questions if there are follow-ups. But basically, it's ensuring that the content is representative of all people and communities to promote equity through the content we publish and the voices we amplify. So that the idea is a lot of the research that we've seen, a lot in psychology, it's on self-report information from white middle-class students at these big research institutions, often in the Midwest or somewhere like that. And so the idea is that through a lot of the open science initiatives, there should be more disclosure about, who the research is done on and who it should apply to. And so the idea is that then it should then expand, and you're actually researching and looking at things that impact everyone, and doing the actual research on everyone, and not just assuming, oh, hey, we did this research on this selection of people, and now we're just going to say it applies to everyone. Like, you had to start somewhere, but now it's time we branch out and be a little more mindful of that. Cheryl or Jenna, did you want to add anything?
Nope, I don't.
Okay.
Let's see, we have another question. Can you talk about reviewer payment, whether that's part of your best practices, and how it's ethically justified to expect free work if not? Has this changed, knowing that so many people have lost work during the pandemic?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that comes up a fair amount when you discuss peer review, and it's a pretty hot topic because it's a lot of work that people are doing for us, and it is unpaid. I know, so it's not something that we have discussed lately. It comes up every so often, but there is a concern that if you're paying reviewers, you're then narrowing the field, and you're getting the reviews from people who, definitely are not as broadly across, because you're finding the people who really need to be part of that process. So there was a worry that you're taking advantage of people that way. I just know that generally I see a lot of back and forth about this, but it's not something that we have, pursued or discussed. We talk a lot about how to encourage reviewers and the benefits they get from it. And so we use Publon, so reviewers do get recognition on there. We're setting up Orchid for reviewers across all of our titles. We had started that this year, but it's one of the things that kind of got pushed aside for a little bit just to kind of get some other things done. And we do try to make sure that reviewers are getting use out of it as well. So they see the final masked decision letter, so they know kind of, okay, this is how the editor's thinking. So we're hoping that they are getting a useful experience out of it. And that is also why we strive to not make it cumbersome for them, because they are doing a great service to the field. And we don't want them having to feel like they're jumping through a lot of hoops or we're taking advantage of them.
So speaking of peer reviewers and diversity, do you have specific efforts of outreach to, for example, earlier career researchers or psychologists? Do you try to actively make the peer reviewers more diverse, or is that up to the editorial boards themselves?
Jenna, I think you were speaking to this a little earlier. Did you want to respond more specifically?
I would just say it's a mixture of both. We developed an internal group of staff that, are developing projects to engage with early career psychologists. But we also, like Lois mentioned, in all of our editor orientations, we have documents on how to make your board more diverse and how to engage with early career psychologists, whether that be granting fellowships or just encouraging co-reviewers. So we're grad student reviewers, and we make sure to give them recognition too that they've helped review in the journal.
Okay, and we have another question here, a couple more questions. How many journal editors are you working with?
So across the board, we have about 90, well, more than that, because we have some co-editors, 90 editors that are main editors. And then for associate editors, any journals might have anywhere from 2 to 20. And so multiply that across the 90. So we have hundreds of people we're working with who are kind of the deciders on a manuscript, but I'd say probably about 100 who are the main editors.
Let's see, our next question from the audience is actually from our next speaker, who will be speaking at 3:15, Randy Townsend. Hi, Randy. For the policy update related to name changes, is there any guidance that the APA has offered to publishers on how that policy should be applied, particularly as it relates to metadata or related publishing elements?
Oh, that's a great question. We had released a statement about it, just saying we're doing this for kind of authors' benefit, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that since we've done it from the logistical standpoint, we could also put something out there for other publishers. That's a great question. I don't recall exactly what we're doing on the metadata side of it. I know we are updating the author name, and the idea is yes, if you're looking for that author for the actual article, you might not find it, but the DOI, the title, if the authors are using ORCID, that should help the people find it. But that's a good idea that we should put something out there. Thank you.
Let's see. We also have, this one says, not a question. I just want to thank APA for their very helpful bias-free language updates to their publication manual. You mentioned them at the beginning. I have been able to point writers to these guidelines as well as editors and indexers. I should note myself that I also point our students to those as well as to your peer review training guides, which are also very helpful. So thank you.
That's great to hear.
I think, so there are some other questions that we probably won't have time to get to, but they did give you their email addresses, so feel free to contact them. I guess we'll take maybe this one last question, and sorry for some people that you didn't get your questions answered. You mentioned referencing COPE's guidelines and scholarly kitchen posts when developing the editorial board toolkit and other guidance for staff and editors. Are there any other resources that have been particularly useful?
Cheryl, do you want to address that one?
So I'll say when I was creating the toolkit, I was using a lot of APA-specific guidelines. So that was kind of like APA publication standards and just also like journal standards as well. I'm trying to think if there's some more external ones might be helpful, but I believe like some of that information may be included in the pub manual.
Okay. And lastly, my friend Stephen Smith mentions that there is also the APA Reviewer Mentorship Program, which teams up a reviewer with a beginner. So thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
So I do want to thank Lois and Cheryl and Jenna for this excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it myself, and it's great to have, as I mentioned, former students of our program presenting at this conference. We are going to have a short break, and at 3:15, Randy Townsend will be talking about author harassment, and at 3:45, we'll have another session on publishing and inclusive language. And I want to thank again our presenters as well as our attendees, and we'll see you at 3:15.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.